Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Some comic pros have a complete contempt and disdain for what are called legacy characters. And a legacy character is a character who has a taking on the name of an existing hero, but it's a completely different person who has the secret identity. And examples of legacy heroes are characters like the Wally West Flash, who took over for Barry Allen back in the 80s after the Crisis of Infinite Earths, Kyle Rayner, who took over for Hal Jordan in Green Lantern, or characters like Dick Grayson, who realized that they have outgrown the role that they played as Batman's sidekick Robin, but have gone out to establish himself as his own man, Nightwing. And these legacy characters, oftentimes in places like the DC Universe, what they show us is that these characters have grown older, and that as these characters have grown older, they have decided to either go outside of their mentor's mission or carry on the legacy of a mentor who meant a lot to them. And some comic pros have a real serious issue with legacy characters because I believe many of them fear their own mortality. And because they fear their own mortality, what they do is they cannot accept the change of that's being made when these characters are taking over the role of their mentors or going on like Nightwing to go on to become their own man like Dick Grayson did when he became Nightwing. That's a problem many of these creators have because they want their characters to remain the same. And what they don't understand is that this is all part of people growing older, and this is all part of life going on. See, what they want their fantasy to be is cemented the exact same way it was when they grew up, and they don't want their fantasy world to change, not understanding that their generation has already passed on, and what they were supposed to do is pass these characters on so that the next generation could tell their stories through them. And one of the stories that was told very effectively in the Flash series of the late 80s featuring Wally West as the Flash was the dealing with the grieving of Barry Allen, because the grieving of Barry Allen, it signified two things. One, it signified the end of the Silver Age and the start of the Modern Age, because Barry Allen's Flash in Showcase number 4 ushered in the Silver Age, and that mourning with Wally West enabled readers to mourn all of the tragic events that transpired in the Crisis of Infinite Earths. And as we started to see Wally West deal with the loss of his mentor, we started to see the Wally West character really grow from boy into manhood, and that was something that was great to see Wally West not only grow from boy to man, but to take on his mentor's role and become a hero just as great as his mentor. And that was one of the great stories that came out of the late 80s and the early 90s with the Flash series. The other great story was seeing Dick Grayson step out of his mentor, Bruce Wayne's shadow, and go from being a sidekick to becoming his own man, Nightwing. And as he became Nightwing, he became a completely different hero with a completely different mission, and it showed tremendous growth in the character. And this is something that guys like Dan Dido don't like seeing with these legacy characters, is all of the growth, because in their minds it should still be Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, Barry Allen as the Flash, Dick Grayson still wearing a Robin costume, but I believe that those type of stories really stagnate the development of the character, because one of the great things about legacy characters is seeing these characters move forward and seeing these characters literally adopt the values of their mentors and then go on to become their own men and women. Because part of being a sidekick is not just being the partner to the hero, but it's about showing this character learning and growing and then changing. And that was one of the great things about the pre-crisis DC universe on Earth 2, is what we saw, not only the heroes growing older, but we also saw their children growing up to take their places. And your Dan Dido, he doesn't like that, but that's all part of life. And that was one of the great things about the DC universe, is that it showed superheroes as people living life, and one of the parts of life is death. And this is something that I believe some comic pros have a serious issue with, in that they fear their own mortality. And because they fear their own mortality, they want to try to keep these characters that they know alive, not understanding that they're impeding the growth of the comic book industry, because the next generation just wants their own heroes, and they can't get their own heroes because we have these old heroes who had passed on in previous comics, and then readers had already accepted their deaths, and then you have people like Dan Dido wanting to bring them back. Because I've always believed the return of Hal Jordan and Barry Allen, those were two events that literally derailed the DC universe, because most people had accepted Barry Allen's death in the Crisis, and more people had accepted Hal Jordan's death in the Final Night. And because they had accepted those deaths, they were ready to move on, and they were moving forward with both of those characters, Flash and Green Lantern, and they were also moving forward with other legacy characters like the Jack Knight Starman, who had been widely accepted for years, or the Michael Holt Mr. Terrific, who today is seen as Mr. Terrific. Most people don't know who Terry Sloan is, but if you ask anyone, they know who Michael Holt is. And again, that's all part of the legacy. And seeing these characters change and grow, that was one of the great things of the DC universe, because we see that in this battle for truth and justice, that these are high stakes, and it is even possible for a hero to lose their life. But when it comes down to your Dan Didos and many others, they don't want to put that part of the hero's journey in their stories, and they want to try to erase the legacy characters, because they just, again, as I believe it, are extremely afraid of their own death. As a creator, I know that at one point in everybody's life, we are all going to die, and because as we are going to die, we have to think about things that are more important, like our legacies, and those legacies that allow these legendary tales to be told, and whether they be told featuring a Barry Allen or a Wally West, we still get to see the Flash in action, or whether it be a Kyle Rayner or a Hal Jordan, we still get to see Green Lantern in action. And that's the most important thing, is seeing somebody take on the mantle of this hero, and valuing the mantle of this hero so much that they're willing to continue the mission of this hero. And this is one of the things that I have a real serious issue with some of these creators, in that they want to kill certain characters because they don't like them, because they are showing how much older certain characters are. Like with Dick Grayson becoming Nightwing, it shows that Bruce Wayne has gotten older. But one of my favorite characters in the DC universe was Batman Beyond, because in Batman Beyond, we got to not only see an elderly Bruce Wayne, but we got to see how he used his wisdom to mentor his son, Terry McGinnis. And that was one of the greatest legacy stories in the DC universe, was the Batman Beyond story, because we got to see that Bruce's legacy was carried on by his son, and that his son continued with the legend of Batman. And that was something that a lot of people didn't really appreciate in the beginning, because again, they feared their mortality because they want these characters to remain immortal. But seeing Bruce Wayne as an old man, that was something that what made the Batman Beyond series really great, because we got to see that no matter how old Bruce was, he was still Batman, and he could still contribute to the protection of Gotham City and making sure that somebody didn't lose their lives in the exact same way his parents lost their life. And when you step aside and let these characters be themselves, one of the things that happens is that's when their legend continues to grow. That's how characters start to have a legend. And because these creators want to maintain their own mortality within these characters, what they do is they hinder the growth and development of these characters. Because as I see it, legacy characters were one of the great things as related to the DC universe, because legacy characters showed us how precious life was in the DC universe, and they also showed us how dangerous the work of a hero was in the DC universe. So when I look at this whole disdain for legacy characters, it just shows me how little vision your Dan Dido has for DC Comics, and how he just doesn't understand how important legacy was, because we've had legacy ever since the establishment of Earth 1 and Earth 2, and it was that legacy that made those character stories incredibly compelling, and it made it even more compelling as the new universe started in the late 80s, in that we saw not only these heroes taking on the legacies of older heroes, but we saw their families and children growing up, and that made it a more humanized place, the DC universe. And all of that, I believe, was lost because your Dan Dido has this vision for the DC universe where everything stays the same, and because everything stays the same, nothing grows, and that's why the stories there aren't really that compelling, and the books really haven't been selling that well ever since he took over back in 2002. Because when you look at the DC universe, it was those legacy characters that enabled one generation to connect with one generation of heroes, and then the next generation takes on those mantles and goes on. Because I look at what he's doing to Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, and again, it just shows so much contempt for legacy characters, and it's that contempt for legacy characters that really is hurting the DC Comics brand, and it's all because this man has a fear of death, and he has a fear that his favorite characters will eventually become forgotten. And they will never be forgotten, because as long as these characters are in print, their legacies will go on, and their legacies will go on because when you have a great character in something like America's mythology, which is the comic book, people are going to pass these characters down from generation to generation, and maybe the names are going to be different for one, or maybe these characters will carry on in different stories, but people are going to remember these characters based on the stories they are in, the adventures they have, and they're going to pass those legends down from generation to generation. So this is something that many creators, they have this great fear of. They fear that if they die, the characters are going to die with them, but that's not the case at all. I mean, if we look at great American literature, a lot of characters have gone on for centuries, and the reason why they have gone on is because the stories that were created resonate from one generation to the next. And that's one of the things that's not being focused on with Dan Dido and his agenda over at DC Comics is focusing on telling great stories. It's all about him making a DC universe that fits his view and not telling stories that people can connect with and share from generation to generation. And this is why DC Comics is in the mess that it's in. It's because he wanted to make a DC universe that fits his view of the world instead of trying to share stories about these characters that people can tell from year to year, generation to generation, and share what's great about the characters. It's all about his fear of dying, and that's the thing that's killing the DC universe. And if you had someone at the DC Comics right now who understood mortality and understood that, yes, we're all going to die, but what we leave behind can go on, this is someone who would treat these characters with respect and understand that when a character passes on in a story, it doesn't mean the end of a character. It means that their legend will go on even after they die. So this is something many people, they don't really think about, but it's something I've thought about because when I hear many creators out there saying that they just don't like certain legacy characters because they make the character older, it makes me understand that they're insecure about getting old and they're insecure about dying. But that's just all them not understanding this thing we call life. And if you understand this thing we call life, you all know that we're all going to die and we're all going to get old. So this is just something that's just part of life, and we need to see that part of life in comics, because when you see that part of life in comics, it makes it relatable to the reader, because a lot of readers, they have older people in their families, older people in their lives, and these people are heroes to people in their lives, and they want to see how they contribute. Now, that's one of the things I liked about seeing Jay Garrick and Alan Scott as Flash and Green Lantern, is that show that senior citizens can still be heroes, and seeing Bruce Wayne on Batman Beyond showed me that they could still impart wisdom to younger heroes. Because one of the things about being older is that when you are a parent, you want to pass that knowledge on to your children, and you want to see your children go on to go out here and continue pushing forward, because that's one of the things a parent wants to see, because they know that in their time that their life's work is preparing the next generation. And that's what I see the legacy heroes as. The parents who had these values and this mission, they prepared their sidekicks to take on their mantle, and as they took on their mantle, they eventually became just like them. So that's something a legacy hero does in the positive, and that's something that most of these comic pros today just don't appreciate. When I read the Wally West Flash when I was a teenager, I really appreciated the fact of seeing him dealing with the death of Barry Allen and seeing him try to be a hero like Barry Allen. And one of my favorite stories is The Return of Barry Allen, where Wally steps out of Barry's shadow and becomes his own hero and starts becoming his own man. And while he honors Barry with his own costume and his own different way of doing things, he still stays true to the legacy of the man he's honoring. Same thing with watching Dick Grayson become Nightwing. He still learned all the things from Batman, but he still wanted to go and become his own man. And as he became his own man, he became a different kind of hero. And it was a hero that most people of my generation accepted. And when I look at guys like Dan Dido going out of their way to erase these heroes, what they're doing is trying to erase Generation X and saying that our heroes don't matter, our heroes don't exist. And that's one of the things that's leading to Generation Y, Generation Z, and Millennials not wanting to go out and buy comics, because the Gen Xers could not pass these heroes on to the next generation, because we couldn't, where our legacy was seen as something as having no value. So other generations didn't see these to see comic books as having a value, because when it comes down to legacy characters, you have to be able to be able to pass it down from generation to generation. And the baby boomers, what they want to do with some of these characters is they want to hold on to them. And when they do that, what they're doing is choking the life out of the comic book industry, because each generation is going to create its own heroes. And what the next generations have been doing is they've left comics and gone on to create their own heroes in different media formats. And it's those media formats that have gone on to become more popular. So when I look at this whole thing with legacy characters that Dan Dido and some of these other comic pros have issues with, they don't see how in their attempts to kill legacy characters, they're killing the legacy of superheroes, and they're killing the entire future of the comic book industry. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Smith-Dorella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.